Hello! Well, it seemed only last week that I was out flying this little RunCam Thumb around and not having a particularly good time with it, I have to admit. Although on this quad we got reasonable results out of the camera, but GyroFlow basically made it shaky and awful. However, as I said at the time, RunCam have now come up with the Thumb Pro, and I've got it here. This was very kindly supplied by my friend Gaff, who runs the online store YourFPV. If you're in the UK, don't forget to check them out, because you can get your stuff locally from a UK supplier of stuff. Isn't that good? Anyway, Gaff kindly sent this along for me to see how it goes, and hopefully it's a massive improvement on what was there before. So very quickly, I'll show you this, but I think we'll have to go to close up, because it looks like this. It's a little bit bigger. It's got a big knobbly bit where the lens is. Looks a little bit unbalanced. But let's get a close up. We'll have a bit of a better look at it, and then we'll decide how we're going to fit it on the quad. Right, so what's in the box? We're on the dreaded white and white. Let's get it out quickly before stuff goes. We've got an instruction manual, which looks like a bunch of instructions. I haven't looked at that yet, other than a quick glance to check it out. Now, this is the one that also comes with ND filters. There are options how these come. ND filters are obviously very handy for making the frame rate lower, which can stop the shakes. So the big difference in this one, I think you can see, is this big lumpy bit at the front here. Let me just grab the other camera and I can show you the difference in profile. So that lens is obviously a lot bigger. The entire camera is a little bit thicker, it's a little bit taller, and as such it means I can't just shove this into this mount because it won't fit. But aside from that, also in the box, you get a bunch of things down here. You get 3 filters in this ND filter pack, which are ND16, ND32, and I think this is ND8. Where is it? Yeah, higher the number, the more sort of darker it is. So depending what sort of conditions you're flying in, good idea to use those. We get a micro USB cable. There is a little cable there. This is mainly used for transferring photos from it, so you don't have to take the SD card out, or you can change the settings, which I haven't looked into yet. I noticed it was in the manual, so I'll come to that soon. Also in this, you get this type of mount. Now, good news, this is a TPU mount. Bad news, well, at least for me, I think for many people it would be okay, depending on what sort of quad you've got. Put this around the wrong way. You'd basically have your camera sort of sitting in there like that, possibly around the other way, can't tell. But this requires a flat base, which is what I don't have here. I've got, it's like a GoPro style mount. But I think this will probably be pretty good because it's nice and flexy. It just depends what sort you've got. As I knew I was getting this, I took the step of printing a couple of mounts. I got this one, which somebody designed on Thingiverse without actually having the camera. He just did it from the specs, which is, I think, quite clever. The only problem I've got with this one is I tend to try and move that forward because the battery comes all the way, and if that was to lean back then the battery would hit it. So I also took this mount and I kind of stretched the sides out and up just a bit, so that will go in there. It's not a brilliant fit because the curve has changed, which I didn't know about, but that holds it tight. It's just a case of how well, because that puts it nice and forward. If I had a bit more time I could have designed something myself, but I figured that would do. Also, you get obviously a bunch of screws for that mounting. So one thing you notice is the cable's different. On the previous RunCam Thumb, we literally just had a DC 5V in and a ground. On this new one, we've got the DC in the ground and we've got the RX and TX. This is so you can basically turn the recording on and off through your radio if you want to. For me, what I want to try and do is just fit it on this one, and so I can use that cable as is, and I'm just going to like press the button to record and stuff. But yeah, so let's see how we do the settings on this one, because it's got various modes. It says it's a 4K camera, but I know it only does 4K 30, and I've heard people say it's a little bit stuttery, because I've checked out a few people's footage, mainly Oscar Lang. Oscar always does some good stuff, and he was saying that he was using the 2K setting because you can get 60 frames a second, and it was definitely less clunky. So it's going to be a case of A, how this camera does, B, does it work with GyroFlow better, because I think the gyro data coming out from this was rubbish, and that's why whenever you put it into GyroFlow, the results got worse. So let's see what the results are raw, and then let's see what we can do with GyroFlow. But first, let's check how we set this thing up on the computer. So the first thing I did was just connect the Thumb Pro up to my USB, and I've put a memory card in. You need to make sure you've got a U3 memory card for the high resolutions. That's something that's capable of doing a sustained write of 30 megabits per second. And as soon as I did this, because it mentioned in the instructions about making sure you update the firmware, and I thought, well, how do I know what the firmware's on? And it comes up as a device, and there's a file in there called version.txt, and that tells me that I'm on 117. Then I find out, looking at the RunCam website, that there's a 118 version of firmware, so we should download that. Essentially, we're just copying it onto the SD card. Okay, I've put the firmware on the card, and now I'm going to connect it to a power source via USB, which isn't a computer, which they tell me, I guess because it doesn't want to come up as a drive. So we should get a rapid green-red flashing light on here, so let's connect it up. Okay, we've got red light. Oh yeah, rapid flashing. That is the firmware updating. So as soon as this gets done, I'll plug it in the computer and check whether it says 118. I should mention that after it does the firmware update, the idea is that it should power itself back off again. Yep, that's upgraded. So now, doing the settings, which you do through an app. So to do the parameter settings, you use the RunCam app, which is sort of generic for all sorts of cameras, and we can choose like loads of different ones here. And it's quite interesting how you do it, because you actually create a QR code and then look at it with the camera. So this is what mine was set up out the box as, which is pretty much what I'm after, really. We got the resolution there of 2.7K at 60 frames per second instead of the 4K. The volume is set to FPV instead of normal. I'm guessing this basically puts the volume level down, because of course when all you can hear is the props and the motor spinning, it's very, very loud. Most things are on auto, and we've got things like date stamp is off, mostly sort of medium. All default settings look quite reasonable. We've also got the ability to reset the default parameters or format the micro SD card. So if I go ahead and say format micro SD card, it shows you what to do. You do a double click of the button when it's plugged in, and that will make it go green. At that point, you can go ahead and point the camera at the QR code. Now, it might seem like a bit tricky to say, well, how do I know it's in focus and stuff? Basically, it comes out of green and back into red as soon as you've done it. So I am going to go ahead and format my SD card, which is this one, and then it's probably got these settings anyway, but I'm going to go ahead and use this QR code to put those settings on. Another interesting point of this little camera is if you connect a computer and you do a quick press of that button once, it becomes a webcam, and you can see me in the computer there trying to film with my phone, and there's the little Thumb Pro doing its thing. Picture's not too bad, actually. To say this isn't a very well lit room, it's looking all right. I don't know if it records sound as well, but you know, it's a thing if you want it. I have to say, continued use makes this get quite hot, so I don't know how useful it is as a webcam, but it's something at least. So here we are in the field ready to fly, and I thought what I'd do, because I've got 4 batteries, I don't normally go a long way on this, I'm going to try the different ND filters out. At the moment the ND8's on there, and I was reasonably impressed in this case, because when you put the filter on the original Thumb, it felt very loose, and I ended up having to put some hot glue on it and make sure it didn't come off. These ones go in quite tightly and feel secure. I'll give you a close up of that. Ditto with the SD card holder. There's a little tab you slide across. That feels pretty good as well. So we're going to start with the 8. We're going to go up to the 1632 and then maybe try it without it. Today I'm in this field. The cows are about, but they don't seem to be interested, so I'm risking flying here. I'm probably just going to be flying around the inside because it's pretty windy. I'm in the sort of the lull of the wind, protected by this bush here, but as I was walking up here, it's like, you know, 15-20 mile an hour wind gusting. So if we get up high, it's probably going to be quite shaky anyway, which is not ideal to test this out, but let's give it a try anyway. Let's fly around here. Let's get up in some height and see what happens, and yeah, take it from there.
Okay, up and flying, and if you're wondering why I'm showing you the DVR footage, it was because as soon as I started flying the quad, I noticed my image in the FPV camera was quite bobbly, and that's because of the amount of wind there. I also noticed, surprisingly, that the cows are in this field. Look, they're hiding there just on the left in the shade. Fortunately, they stayed there. They did the sensible thing and not come out in the heat, so I didn't get disturbed by them. But yeah, I just wanted to show you the sort of level we're looking at. If I turn here, this is going heading into wind, and it really is a bit bobbly. I mean, it's not too bad to fly with, but it's not stable image, so I'm not expecting too much from what the HD camera can do here. I just wanted to set that level. So the first thing I want to do is show some raw footage with the different filters. Starting out here with no ND filter, and this is not actually the order I flew. I went 8, 16, 32, then on the last battery I flew without an ND filter. But what was quite surprising about this is I don't see much of a difference between them, and I guess that's because that generally speaking what the ND filter does is make the camera take a longer exposure, and this generally alleviates the type of rolling shutter problem you get when it's like a sort of a wobble or the jello effect. Where we're not having this on this quad, we're just having some general wind shakes. Where we're not seeing that sort of jello effect in this quad as it stands, we're not really getting the benefit from using those filters. This would be more interesting, I think, on a different type of quad with a different type of vibration. I went through several quads on the previous RunCam Thumb, and I found that, you know, it was really bad on like a 5-inch, but once you get to these smaller 2.5-inch prop type quad, this one is, you don't really get that frequency of vibration, so it's not quite so much a problem. And that's the noise that the camera records, and unlike normally, I haven't actually had to go in and change the levels in the editor, so it's quite reduced by putting in FPV mode. First impressions of this is 2.7K at 60 frames a second. It's pretty good. We've got obvious shakes here and there in the wind, but the actual camera quality I think is pretty nice. Gone are those horrendous distortions we were getting around the sides, which was really off-putting. So the actual image we're working with, I think, has a lot of promise. The big question is, of course, how well is this going to work with GyroFlow? Can we take some of these wobbles and little bobbles out that the wind caused using GyroFlow? In the original RunCam Thumb, the gyro data that came out seemed to be terrible and I couldn't do anything with it. But let's take a look at this one and hope for the best. Okay, so here we are in GyroFlow, and I've gone ahead and loaded the ND8 footage I took. And one thing I noticed about the new camera is previously on the previous RunCam Thumb camera, you had to basically change the options so you write out the gyro data. On this camera, we get a GCSV file for every video file, so that happens automatically. What I've gone ahead and done in this clip is I've brought in my file. I found a RunCam Thumb Pro lens profile done for someone called Morgan. Thanks, Morgan. And I've gone ahead and loaded my GCSV data. I've then taken 10 sync points with a search side of 10 seconds, and I've gone ahead and I've said auto sync. What I get from that, and this is the big difference between this and the previous camera, is if I go and let's say zoom in on one of these points, you can see that our optical data is following the gyro data properly. It actually seems to be working, so the gyro data must be good for it to be able to sync up like that. Let's just have a look at another one. Yeah, we're getting a reasonable follow there. Now I've gone ahead and tried exporting some data from this. What I ended up doing is I've changed the FOV to 2.0 because I found 1.0 a little bit zoomed in. Because I use a static zoom, because I didn't like it when it sort of searched in and out, I felt that the 1.0 was a little bit too much, although I upped the smoothness slightly. There is still stuff to play with here, but anyway, let me show you this first thing. Literally all I've done is say auto sync and then export, and I've done the whole file because that way I can easily compare it against the existing raw data. But let's have a look at what this looks like. So here's the side by side, and as soon as I started watching this, I was immediately thinking, oh no, it hasn't worked. GyroFlow seems to put bobbles in it. But as soon as we got to this turn, everything smoothed out. I don't quite know what the problem was with that initial takeoff. Perhaps I should go back and look at the gyro data, but this was literally a press the button, do an auto sync, and let's see what turns out. And what turns out, I was really impressed with. By no means is it perfect, there's still little shakes there, especially going into the wind. I can also see very occasional there's one of these little artifacts. You just get this flash of something on the screen which looks like it's, you know, just a corrupted frame or something. It doesn't happen very often, but you can see it. If you hunt carefully with your eyes, you'll notice it occasionally. However, what it's done to the footage is miraculous. Especially when compared to the original camera. It's so much better. It's taken out all those little bobbles and wobbles, and it makes my flying look ridiculously smooth, much smoother than it was. But more importantly, it really has done wonders on taking away the problems really caused by the wind, problems which I really didn't think we'd be able to get rid of. Of course, this means that we've zoomed in. This is zoomed into about 120% of the regular size or resolution of the image, but because we're dealing with 2.7K to start with, it doesn't look too bad. If you're only at 1080p and you zoomed in an extra 20%, you'd be looking at some quite nasty footage. And as I said, we really don't have those distortions, so the output I've got, I'm really quite happy with. So I basically decided to do the same for all the other ones, which was essentially to open the file, then go ahead and open the corresponding GCSV file, auto sync it, which takes about a couple of minutes, change the FOV to 2.0, have a static zoom and export that file, which takes about 10 minutes. Now you probably noticed a bit in GyroFlow that says if you set the FOV over 1, then you can find black bars appearing on the screen, and to be fair, I didn't find that in the original one I did at all. It all looked good, but as soon as I got on the other ones, perhaps they were later batteries and I'd loosened up a bit, so I was flying a little bit more aggressively, I started getting these creeping in. I thought, oh well, you know, I can just sort of edit around that, and I thought, you know what, let's go back and let's redo some of these using the dynamic zoom and let's compare them. And this is the bit that puts me off. At the start, I always see the camera sort of zooming in slowly. But if we jump over a little bit further, you can see that the FOV is practically indistinguishable. But on the static zoom, you can see those black borders appearing. And on the dynamic zoom, it doesn't. It's slightly more zoomed in if you look very, very carefully. But it does a fairly good job, I think. I'm not too disappointed by this. I think, for the most part, you've got almost identical. It's a little bit more zoomed in, but it doesn't seem to do that bad in terms of what's going on there. I also found how to get rid of this dodgy bit at the beginning. Previously, when I was doing the whole clip, it would go all sort of wobbly at the start of the clip, and you notice the dynamic zoom doesn't have any of that. Yeah, the static zoom at this point sort of smooths out, but why was it like crap for sort of 10-20 seconds before I actually got there? And the reason was this. What I was doing previously in GyroFlow is converting my entire clip because it was very easy to line up against the raw clip. But this stuff over here is me picking up the quad and chucking it on the floor. You can see the gyro data is all over the place, and that seems to be causing, it's basically spurious data, and it uses this to sort of work out the stabilization, and of course that is rubbish, and the stuff after I landed is rubbish. But by basically setting the trim where the takeoff was and the end as the landing, and then auto syncing and exporting that, you see here my FOV is 1 and my dynamic zooming there. I didn't touch the zooming speed, 2.5 seconds it says. I haven't touched it, so I guess that's default. And then I export from there. That has fixed that problem where it's all a bit shaky at the beginning. So then I went back and I exported all the clips using this method instead. And then what I thought I might show you here is a little bit of a best of clips from the various flights, but then I realised that I'd pretty much flown the exact same lines on every battery just so I could compare them carefully. Although this has led to one other interesting thing. Because I've gone through and watched all the clips very carefully, I've come to the conclusion that the stuff with the ND32 looks the best. On the others, there were just a couple of little times where there was these little micro vibrations. Now, this could have been, of course, coincidence and I just hit the wind badly there, or it could be the fact that the higher filter has managed to take away some of those little micro shakes. Now, this is by no means perfect. If you look at this carefully, you'll see plenty of little shakes going on. It's still getting blown around in the wind. There's a little bit of yellow here and there, you might see. But it is a hell of a lot more stable and nicer looking than the non-stabilised image. And certainly as far as the camera goes, I mean, it's light and day compared to the original RunCam Thumb. This one actually does something. I'm completely new to GyroFlow, but it's interesting to play with, of course, because now it finally works. I can start messing about with it and checking out what to do and what happens. Well, I'm so excited to say that this thing actually did the job. It did the job that the original was supposed to do, which is write out decent gyro data so GyroFlow could do something with it, have enough of a resolution and a frame rate so we could actually use that image to zoom in to try and take away those shakes. I think it worked really well. Like I said before, it doesn't get rid of everything. You can't simply replace the GoPro. If you want the ultimate image, you will be using the best GoPro you can with Hypersmooth, and then you can go back and smooth it some more with GyroFlow if you want to. However, this is much cheaper than a GoPro, and you can put it on something very small. And the results you get are pretty good, I think. They're not broadcast quality, but if you want to share your videos with people and get it nice and stabilised, I think this does a pretty good job. Now, on this particular one, we're obviously flying with this tiddly little FPV quad, the Pavo 25, which is 2.5mm props. And, you know, this is okay, but it blows around in the wind. I would really like to put this on something like a 5-inch to see how it copes with different sort of vibrations, different speed, see how that goes. The previous model, really bad, but this one's got good ND filters. It puts out proper gyro data. I'd really like to see how that goes. As far as GyroFlow goes, as I said, I'm a complete beginner because previously I was trying to manually do things to make it work and it just wouldn't work, and I was getting really quite upset with it, and I began to thinking that the whole idea of it was like snake oil salesman. But having seen how it does in this, it's really quite nice software, but you've got to give it good data in to get good results out. So this certainly added time to what I was doing, but I wasn't doing anything special. I'd had a bit of a play, but essentially what I was doing was the defaults, the dynamic zoom, and then I was saying essentially autosync, export, which is like a couple of minutes to autosync, about 10 minutes to export the file. So added stuff, but I think the results were worth it. But please consider this part 1 of this review, because I want to come back and I want to try it out in different situations, want to mess with GyroFlow some more, want to try and put it on a bigger quad like a 5-inch, see what happens. Thanks so much to Gaff at YourFPV for sending this along. Really enjoyed that, and let's see what else we can do with it. And of course, if you're in the UK, please check out his shop. There's a link down below, and you can pick one up locally in the UK then. Anyway, I hope this review's been helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.